I am so glad I picked up Promise of Blood. From very early, I cared about the characters. For me, that's really important. I like a character-driven book. These characters are humorous, sarcastic, intense. I had also just come off of a couple of books that didn't have as good of characterization, so picking this one up and already feeling like I needed to know what happened to these characters drew me in even further. Promise of Blood is the first book in the Powder Mage Trilogy by Brian McClellan. It is mostly good. I have a couple of nitpicky things, and my main problem with this comes from my feminine perspective, but that's not where I'm going to start. This is a spoiler-free review. I will go over characters, plot, magic, the normal stuff. This trilogy is set in a time a little more modern than your normal classic fantasy. It's about equivalent to French Revolution, Napoleonic, late 1700s, early 1800s. It is the age of gunpowder. Gunpowder being a source of magic for some people. The people who can use gunpowder are the powder mages. Magic is kind of a big part of a fantasy book, so I'll start there. This world has two basic types of magic that we know about so far in the first book, which are sorcery and powder magery. The main powerful sorcerers are called privileged. They can touch the else, which is their source of magic. They use their hands to control it. They wear special gloves with runes. Supposedly, if you remove a privileged hands, they can still sense the else, the magic source, but they can't control it. And the privileged generally work for the king, the king's royal cabal. The other main type of magic comes from gunpowder. The magic systems are pretty soft. They don't go into a lot of detail of explaining how it works, but a powder mage can use gunpowder to heighten their senses. They can dull pain. They can control where a bullet is going, kind of direct its path a little bit, like nudge it, keep it going for longer. They can ignite gunpowder from a distance. They could fire bullets without a gun, toss up the bullets, blast them forward. The main problem with powder mage magic is that black powder is addictive. They go into what's called a powder trance. So they have to use it to use magic, but they can easily get hooked on it. There's a couple different kinds of magic which I believe fall under the sorcery umbrella. There's what's called knacked people. They have a special talent that uses magic, stronger than what a normal person is able to do. Then there's one character who has like her own special type of magic, still sorcery, but a different type. And everyone who can use magic has a third eye, a mental, spiritual awareness that they can open and see other magic users. They can see magic being worked, but they don't keep it open all the time. And so sometimes another mage will be like, open your third eye and see if there's any. This is also a little different from your normal classic fantasy in that there's not a big evil villain. There's no dark lord they're having to defeat. At the very beginning, very first chapter, it even says in the blurb on the cover, "The Age of Kings is dead and I have killed it." It's a revolution. There's a coup. This story takes place in the after effects of that coup. They are trying to navigate the political landscape of what they have done without letting their country fall to pieces. There are villains, there's bad guys, there's people trying to kill each other, but it's not one big bad guy they have to defeat. There is an enemy country who wants to come in and take over while they're weak. And there is this weird magical threat, and that is a main part of the plot, if you will. I'm gonna say it's not super plot driven, it is more character driven. But part of the plot is God even real? The God that supposedly founded the royal family. They say that if we take that royal family down, God is going to be mad and come have vengeance. But they've never seen evidence of God. Magic? Real. We believe that. God and his anger? We'll risk it. Educated people don't believe in gods, and there's a lot of the little like, is there, isn't there, do we believe this threat? Once they take down the king and they're trying to navigate this political landscape, there is a traitor that they have to find. They have to decide what's the priority. There's a traitor in their midst. There's also this enemy king with an army. There's also the threat of God's anger. They have to secure power, feed the people, there is a lot going on. There is a lot of tension, and so that big Dark Lord villain isn't really needed for this story. The story and the plot were just fine without it. And I enjoyed the characterization in this book. I was a little annoyed at some of the naming conventions. Names like Tamis and Taniel and Rickard, I felt like were just, well, I like the names Thomas and Daniel and Richard, but they don't sound like fantasy names. So let's change them just a little bit. Tamis is the field marshal who kills the king or causes the king to die. I don't remember if he's the one who did it. And a lot of the relationships in this story are around Tamis and the people around him. His best friend and co-worker, co-mage, Saban, his bodyguard, Olim, and his son, and his son's fiance, and his son's best friend. There are a lot of themes of relationships, friendships that have stress on them, family relationships, allies who might not actually be allies, but we don't know. And something I appreciated in all of that character work and all the relationship tension was that there were little bits, little sentences, or just a scene here and there that had no plot relevance, but really gave you a good view of what the character was like. A character that gets hired as a bodyguard, it would have been good enough to just tell us what his job previous to being the bodyguard was, but instead we follow a character into what he's currently doing, and we get to see just how brutal of a person he is and how good he'll be at being a bodyguard. And then another bodyguard, actually. It happened a couple times with bodyguards. The other bodyguard got to show some of his heroism before becoming a bodyguard. So even though you don't follow his character as much, once he's in place with the main character, you already like him from a scene that happened earlier. I really like that kind of stuff. It didn't go overboard, didn't take too much page space, just enough to see what kind of person we're dealing with, and if something happens to them, you'll be sad. So most of what I have said so far is stuff that I think is good. It is a good book overall. I do recommend it. The things I was not as fond of, there were a lot of physical descriptions of characters. I would almost say too much. I don't know if I need to picture quite so clearly what everyone looks like. It was a little weird how often there were short sentences. Normally a group of short sentences is to kind of emphasize certain ideas in a row. This had a lot of short sentences. It's not a terrible thing, it just felt a little awkward sometimes. There were long sections of dialogue with minimal to no dialogue tags. For the most part, I actually like that. A lot of times your eyes just kind of skim over dialogue tags without really noticing, especially if it's just, they said. Most of the time I like that. Once in a while I would lose track and couldn't remember which character was speaking. And there were a few places that had kind of awkward action beats, like the transitions from the character is doing this and now they're doing this, and sometimes it felt very sudden. It didn't happen too often, it was just enough that I noticed. And my biggest complaint about the book comes from my perspective as a female reader of the book. One is that there was only one point of view female character. I feel like that one's not as big of a deal though, because the author is a man. And if someone is more comfortable writing from the point of view of a person who is like them, whether it's gender, ethnicity, able-bodiedness, whatever, if that's what you feel like you can do well, sure, cool. I don't mind reading a book with a male main character or male perspective, but what did bother me was that it felt like the women characters were all extras. Like women as a separate species were less important. They weren't treated that way in book necessarily. The mercenary leader is a woman. A couple of the strongest sorcerers in the book were women, but I really got the feeling that from the male characters' points of view, the purpose of women in the world is to have sex with and to bear children. Now those couple of powerful women, one of the powerful sorcerers and the mercenary leader, you could say those women cared more about power, but it still felt like a very narrow view of women in general. They're for bearing children and taking care of the children, or if that's not what they're providing for us, the men, then they must want power. The one female point of view character just felt less fleshed out than the male point of view characters. All the guys, the men, all had something extra about them. Tamis, the field marshal, the big guy who did the big thing, loves his dogs. His son is an artist. He carries around a sketchbook and draws. Another one of the characters is always rolling a cigarette. All those guys have a thing. And then the female point of view character, her thing that she cares about, that she does, is the young boy that she's looking after. She's a laundress. She does laundry and she cares about the young boy. It felt like only the men cared about big picture stuff. The women's view was more narrow. Their characterization was more narrow. None of the women in the book got any like relationship or friendship growth like the men got. And like I said, if an author is more comfortable writing from their own point of view, cool. But don't make the characters that are not like you feel like they're lesser. It was still enjoyable. I will still probably read the rest of the trilogy. If I enjoy that, I might read the trilogy that comes after this. I just have to go in knowing that I'm reading a book probably for a male audience. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think anyone can benefit reading a book from someone else's perspective because you learn, your empathy can grow. Parts of it were just a little annoying. If I left out anything that you wish you would know about the book, I'm happy to answer questions and comments. I'm sure I forgot something, but I want to keep it spoiler free. So hope it was helpful and happy reading.